Thank you, Phil. Phil mentioned when he was praying there a number of times for compassion and mercy. And I mentioned to his community earlier in the year that I felt like, and this was, I checked this up earlier in January, when I felt like there was a time in our church community where it felt like more people were struggling than ever before in my time. This is my nearly 10th year here at Croydon Hills. And I'm just increasingly aware that that's the case. I'm seeing it in a variety of different areas, not even just one particular thing. So many of you know that we have a number of people at the moment who are struggling with cancer, with significant health issues in that space. But it's not even just the health issues. There are people who are struggling in relationships, people who are struggling in themselves. And I just want to implore as much as I can on all of us two things. One is that we continue to pray for one another. And the second thing is, if I can say this, if we can just be, maybe even intentionally, a little bit kinder and gracious to one another. It sounds like those words almost sound like a little bit trite, kinder to each other. But I just kind of mean like cut each other a little bit more slack. Just try to be a little bit more gracious to one another. I'm just aware of some of the stresses that are going on. And I think that could be a beautiful expression of what it means for us to be a community of love in this place as well. Sorry, for those of you who don't know me, my name's Andrew anyway, and I'm one of the pastors here, the senior pastor here. And if you had joined us last week, we are preaching through this strange book. I'm meant to have sent kids out. I'm not meant to have sent kids out. Can I just say this? In the guide it says Ben is meant to have sent the kids out. And I thought that the kids were so excited they wanted to listen to me speak. I was speaking to one of my children this morning who was coming along to a service this morning, and I said, "There's so much looking forward to hearing her dad speak because it doesn't happen enough at home." But we're having a journey through the book of Ezekiel. So if you have a Bible and you want to open it up to Ezekiel, it's kind of like about, I'm guessing kind of 60% of the way through your Bible if I'm trying to think about where it might fit in terms of page numbers. If you've got a app of some sort, it starts with E. Not that hard to find. Trying to think about all the books that start with E. Ecclesiastes. Someone else help me? What else starts with E? So, Ephesians. Esther. Oh man, you guys are good. Did you know that the kids downstairs at the moment are doing a challenge where they are meant to memorize all of the books of the Bible? My goodness, what a challenge. And I'm told that if someone can do it, they're going to slime me. I said to Meg, how does that happen? Why aren't they sliming you? I feel like I should bring other people down with me. One of the things that maybe you do or don't know me about me is I love sport, and I play volleyball each week as kind of like a sporting and competitive outlet. But this past week, I chose not to play. It was a difficult decision. I've had a pretty decent cold, recovering from a kind of a strained muscle in the middle of my back, and I was still feeling the effects of an infection in a tooth. But this was missing a game of sport. It takes a lot for me to miss a match, because I love to play. In my life, I've always thought that there are two types of sickness. There's school sickness. You know what school sickness is, don't you? And then there's sports sickness. A bone needs to be sticking out of my leg before I would miss a game for sports sickness. It's not unreasonable to say one has a high motivation and one has a much more lower. Ask yourself, when it comes to motivation, what does it take to get you to do something? Or even if you flip it around, what does it take you to miss something? You can probably relate to how I see these motivations in different ways, because I suspect that there are activities in your life which require school sickness to miss and some which require sporting sickness to miss, aren't there? What motivates you? I wrote a few ideas that came to my mind. So sometimes I'm motivated by pleasure. I love to read and I'm loving this new book I've just bought. It's not hard to be motivated by something that we enjoy and is freely available, is it? Pleasure is a motivator for all of us in some shape or form. Reward is often a motivator as well. I have to read War and Peace for English. It's so long, but I know if I can read it, I can get a decent mark and then I can get into the course I want to get. There's a reward and incentive at the end of it. Sometimes we have a motivator, fear. I need to read this manual and give a summary report on it to my boss or I'll be fired. Fear can be a motivator, a strong motivator. Sometimes challenge can be a motivator. I dare you to read the complete works of Shakespeare. 7 down, only 47 to go. The challenge is great. Sometimes we're motivated by challenge, aren't we? Some of us are motivated by duty. Every good Christian should read the Bible each day, and I'm going to do that. I've got a strong sense of duty. Sometimes we're motivated by pleasing people. I mean, you could look at this in two ways, as a kind of a negative and a positive. I mean, a people pleaser, if you've ever heard that phrase, is often a derogatory term, isn't it? Can't make up your own mind, you're driven by the needs of others. But it could also be seen in a positive way as an expression of love. To do something that you know you will please someone can be a genuine expression of love, can't it? Satisfaction can be a motivator. I find a long day of working in the garden doesn't appeal to me, but when it's complete, I feel a great sense of satisfaction. Sometimes we're motivated by vision. We have a sense of how something can be. For example, if you're a young person, maybe you have a sense of, we have a vision of buying our own home. So to save for that, we're going to sacrifice. We're going to take hard decisions and hard steps. And I choose to do so because I've got this vision about what lies ahead. In fact, we actually spoke about vision last week, didn't we, if you were here with us? Because this book opens up with an account of Ezekiel seeing a vision of God. In fact, I said to you a number of times, it all begins with a vision of God. And in fact, I asked you a question if you were here last week with us, either online or in person. Would you take 5, 10, 20 minutes to sit down and, in a sense, recapture a vision of who God is? Did you have the opportunity to do that? Was it refreshing? For Ezekiel, he has a vision of a holy, beautiful, powerful God. And that's at the heart of him now. It motivates him. It's what he sees. And in that, God calls him. He has this vision. It motivates his very being, and God calls him. Son of man, it says in verse 3 of chapter 2, I am sending you to the nation of Israel. Here's this call on his life. He sees this vision of God. That's where it begins. And now God calls him. I'm sending you to the nation of Israel. And later on, he has a second vision. This book is filled with visions. He has a second vision. This time, a vision of a scroll. It's not a coffee scroll. It's more like a modern book that unfolds before him. And then in the following chapter, we read this. Son of man, eat what I am giving you. It would be much better, of course, if it was a coffee scroll, wouldn't it? Son of man, eat what I am giving you. Eat this scroll. Then go and give its message to the people of Israel. I told you it was unusual. Eat the book. Why would he do that? In a sense, it's an expression of, I want you to digest this message. I want you to take it into yourself. I want it to be part of who you are. In a sense, as vital to you as food is to your body. And then, deliver the message. Deliver it. Go to the people of Israel and deliver the message. Sounds kind of simple, doesn't it? It can't be that hard to be a messenger. And when I think of messengers, I think of a guy by the name of Phidippides. Can you say that quickly for me? Phidippides. I had to practice that 3 times this morning. Phidippides is the man who was said to have run from the town of Marathon in Greece, to Athens to announce news of what? The victory was won in the Battle of Marathon. He arrives. The message is good news. We've won. How exciting is it to be a deliverer of that message? Of course, the irony is he collapses from exhaustion and dies. Maybe being a messenger is not always easy. And the truth is, for Ezekiel, it will not be easy. You see, Ezekiel is called to be a messenger akin to a watchman. Son of man, I have appointed you as a watchman for Israel. Whenever you receive a message from me, and it's interesting here, it doesn't say give that message to the people, does it? What does it say there on the screen? It says warn the people. Warn the people. That's kind of giving you some sort of indication about what that message is like, because to be a watchman was to be a warning signal, wasn't it? That's what a watchman was about. They stood on the walls of a city in ancient times as a lookout. They needed to be alert, awake. They needed to have a loud voice that people could hear, because their job was to warn the people if what? An enemy approached. And if they failed to do their job, people would die. If they failed to do their job, people's lives are at risk. And this is Ezekiel's calling, to stand on the metaphorical walls of Israel and warn the people. Warn them. What was his message? Son of man, eat what I am giving you. Eat this scroll. Go and give its message to the people of Israel. It says, so I opened my mouth and he fed me the scroll. Fill your stomach with this, he said, and when I ate it, it tasted as sweet as honey. Wait a sec, that doesn't make sense. Do you think that makes sense? He's told to warn people, which sounds like the message is going to be negative, doesn't it? That's what warnings invariably are. But it tastes as sweet as honey. You see, the problem here is that it's kind of that sense of beauty is in the eye of the beholder. The taste is sweet to him, but not to the others. The taste is sweet to him is because Ezekiel has responded positively to the message of God. But the nation will not. I looked and saw a hand reaching out to me. It held a scroll. This is words that he had read, in a sense, as part of that vision just before this part. I saw a hand reaching out to me. It held a scroll which he unrolled. I saw that both sides were covered with funeral songs, words of sorrow, pronouncements of doom. You see, the taste of the scroll for a rebellious nation was not going to be sweet. It's filled with despair. It's a funeral dirge. It's a liturgy of grief, isn't it? Because they're people with hard hearts. Ezekiel, a man who sees this vision of God, but unfortunately the other people will not see that same vision of God. He raises the warning sirens, lifts his voice, but will anybody listen? No. God's word tells us that the people at heart were rebellious. I'm sending you to this nation, a rebellious nation that has rebelled against me. And for anyone who's the parent of a teenager, you know this is not easy, because it feels like at times that children rebel against you just to taunt you. Have you ever noticed how, if you have a teenager, and can I just say, if you're a teenager listening here today, I'm not picking on you. I was a teenager. I very much fit in this category. I speak from words of kind of self-interest. I love teenagers. I love my teenagers. But if you ever speak with a teenager sometimes, you feel like you've said the same message again and again, and maybe there's a little moment later on where they come to you and they go, hey, Dad, I just learnt this great thing. And it's information that you've been sharing with them for years, but they attribute that learning to someone else. It's like they do it to taunt you. Have you seen this person? They're so cool, they're so wise. And you're like, yeah, I've been saying the same thing. Why don't you listen to me? That's the nature of rebellion. Rebellion doesn't want to hear. It doesn't matter whether the words are wise or good or whatever it is. They're just not interested. Because it's almost personal. I'm rebelling against you. But these people are not only rebels, they're also stubborn and hard-hearted, verse 4 tells us, doesn't it? That's an attitude you don't want to see on your school report. And can you imagine rocking up to a job interview and you're asked that question? You know, you've shared with me some of your strengths. Can you tell me about some of your weaknesses? And please, don't tell me that your weaknesses is that you work too hard, all right? Okay? But can you imagine answering that question? Oh, my weakness is that I'm stubborn and hard-hearted. That's code for you're not easy to work with. You're not getting the job. It's not a description you want applied. And the third thing we read about the people is not only that, it says that they're your own people. They're your own people. Son of man, go to the people of Israel, give them my messages, not to a foreign people whose language you cannot understand. No, I'm not sending you with strange speech. If I did, they would listen. But the people of Israel won't listen to you any more than they listen to me. It's kind of true sometimes, isn't it, that those who are closest to us are the hardest to communicate with. It's this strange phenomena that exists amongst us as humans. You have to feel for Ezekiel. He's the equivalent of the new enthusiastic school teacher that some wise person rosters with the most difficult class. That'll get rid of their enthusiasm. The effect of Ezekiel's prophecies on his hearers should have been sorrow and mourning that brought them to repentance, that allowed them to see God, to hear words that were sweet. But the reality was a long way away from that aspiration. How do you think you would feel if you're Ezekiel and called to that vision and mission? What do you think you would suggest to him? What words of advice or encouragement about what to do when no one's listening? What do you think you would say? Well, God offers him some important truths. He says, the first thing, he says you shouldn't fear. You know, fear was one of the motivators that we recognised before, but these are kind of, I suppose, the equivalent of employees that don't give a toss about what you say to them. So don't fear them, he's saying. I think also what he's saying is you're going to be tempted to soften your message, because that's kind of how it happens when fear is around. Son of man, do not fear them or their words. Don't be afraid, even though their threats surround you like nettles and briars and stinging scorpions. Do not be dismayed by their dark scowls, even though they are rebels. You must give them my messages, whether they listen or not. I can hear the voice in Ezekiel's head. Don't fear. Don't fear. Remember the vision of God I've seen. Remember I'm meant to be a watchman. Remember how sweet the message is, because it's a message to return to a holy God of love. Don't fear. I think the second message that he hears from God is this, is have integrity. Have integrity. We've all heard the phrase, don't shoot the messenger, haven't we? Don't shoot the messenger. When people hear a message that makes them uncomfortable, maybe you've done this, I know I've done this, it puts us on edge, it maybe makes us feel a bit guilty. Our natural instinct is to strike out and to shoot the messenger. No matter what you're doing, Ezekiel, your life must stand up to the criticism it will receive. I hear that message. You know, there's a classic education text called The 7 Laws of Teaching by a guy by the name of John Milton Gregory. It's written in the 19th century, and it has some amazingly succinct, simple truths about the nature of communication and education from 150 years ago. And the first law, it says 7 laws of teaching, the first law that it has is this, that a teacher must be one who knows the lesson or truth or art to be taught. That's the first law that it recognised. And do you hear what that's saying? It's saying that a teacher must personally know what they are teaching. Because how can you teach? How can you take someone down a path that you've never been down? How can you speak about something in theory but not know it in practice? That's essentially what the law is about. It's like the equivalent of going to a marriage counsellor and then discovering that they're on their fifth marriage. It kind of doesn't sort of gel, does it? Go to the gym and sign up with a gym instructor, but they're 50 kilos overweight. You're kind of like, there's something out of line here. The two need to be together. You see, the truth is a message has credibility when the teacher has credibility, doesn't it? In Ezekiel 3, we read these words, "Son of man, let all my words sink deep into your own heart first." Let all my words sink deep into your own heart first. It's kind of a beautiful expression, isn't it? I mean, Ezekiel, you can't preach to the nation without hearing and doing the message yourself. Don't be a hypocrite. And you, as much as I, know that we all need to hear that, don't we? The church needs to hear that. Our world needs to be able to see that, to have integrity. And the final message that I see that's given to Ezekiel is one of perseverance. Some of you know that I have two brothers. My middle brother, when he was younger, I used to think of him as the most stubborn individual that I knew. And I got to say, it was not a positive character attribute. Now that he's older, I admire him for his perseverance. He's got a great ability to push forward against the odds, not to be disheartened, to never give up. I thought of him when I read these words about Ezekiel. In verse 8 of chapter 3 it says this, "I have made you as obstinate and hard-hearted as they are. I have made your forehead as hard as the hardest rock." If you have a brother like mine, you can understand that you might think of him in that particular moment. I'm not sure you would want that phrase necessarily put on your gravestone. I've made your forehead as hard as the hardest rock. But when it's perseverance, it's a wonderful attribute to have, isn't it? And here for Ezekiel, in the midst of a hard calling, a hard message, and people with hard hearts, it's a wonderful character attribute to have, isn't it? God's saying to him, persevere with what you're doing. You see, God doesn't only kind of call Ezekiel and give him this vision, but he strengthens him for that journey ahead. And today I would ask you, as I ask myself, is this the message that we need to hear today? Can you see the parallels between the life of Ezekiel and your life? Can you see the parallels between the context of the nation of Israel and the world in which we live in here in Australia in 2022? I don't think it's much of a leap, is it? Each one of us is called to be a watchman, to deliver a necessary but hard message to a cynical world that is rebellious, filled with stony hearts. Each one of us is called by Jesus right from the beginning. Come follow me. Come follow me. It declares it in a sense in our mission thing where it comes from, to be followers of Jesus. Sometimes when people see that statement here, we think that's relating to other people. No, firstly, it actually relates to me. That I will be a follower of Jesus. Come follow me, Jesus says. He says exactly the same thing to each one of us. Come follow me. Again and again, that's the habit, the practice of Jesus. Come follow me. You've got a lot of giftings. You've got great responsibilities when you follow me. I was reading the other day about the phenomenon of shrinkflation. Have any of you heard that term, shrinkflation, in recent days? you'll understand what I'm talking about. A can of Coke used to be 375 mils, then 370, now 300, and you can buy them even smaller. The thing that I notice it most in actually is a block of chocolate. You know, when I was maybe like 17, 18 years old, I used to work at the House of Target. And after I graduated from being a cleaner at the House of Target, I used to sit on a register on a Thursday night in Dandenong. Let me tell you, there is zero customer traffic at the House of Target on a Thursday night back in the mid-1980s, all right? But one of the things that I used to do was I used to buy a block of chocolate. And then I would sit there on the register, that was my job, very important job, and I would eat the block of chocolate during the night. The block of chocolate used to be 250 grams. Then it was 220 grams, and then 200, and now it's 180 grams. That's shrinkflation. Price hasn't gone up, just the amount you're getting is going down. You know what I'm talking about. And I want to ask you today, has there become some sort of shrinkflation in following Jesus? Jesus said, leave everything that you have behind and come and follow me. I feel like when we process that message today, we say, yes, I'll come and follow you, but I just need to outline my terms and conditions here. I need to have a little box to check because there's limits on what I'm going to do. I remember when Narelle and I got married many, many years ago. It's actually our 30th anniversary the other week. 30 years. You ought to clap Narelle. You know that too. But Narelle and I actually wrote our wedding vows. And when I say that, probably Narelle wrote our wedding vows. And I remember in our wedding vows, there was a line about wherever God would lead us, we would go. The disciples knew what that was. But I think sometimes we're attaching terms and conditions to our calling. The call to follow Jesus was never easy. It's always a call to be different from the crowd. There were two guys, Richard Armstrong and Edward Watkin. They conducted a biology experiment with what are called processional caterpillars. Processional caterpillars, as you can imagine by the picture of things, are caterpillars that join in a line and keep going and going together. What they did was on the rim of a clay pot that held a plant. I just want you to know that when I actually Googled caterpillars on pot to get a picture for you, all I got was an information about how to keep your caterpillars off marijuana. But they put caterpillars, these processional caterpillars, on a clay pot, head to head, line them up head to head with the last caterpillar. The tiny creatures circled the rim of the pot for a week. Not once did any one of them break away to go over to the plant and eat. Eventually, all of them died from exhaustion and starvation. Now, I know we shouldn't, in a sense, experiment with animals' lives and stuff like that, but in the lesson of the processional caterpillars, there's kind of a parable of human behaviour, isn't there? Feelings of insecurity and inadequacy force us to circle the events of life, following the person in front, playing life safe. But Jesus calls us to follow him and to break away from the conformity of the world, doesn't he? Instead of just following others, we're actually called to follow him. Ezekiel was calling people to break away. Jesus calls us to break away and be different. If anyone comes after me, he must break away, deny himself, get out of that rut, take up his cross daily and follow me. We know that Jesus didn't live a life of comfort and ease. Now I see in this message today a message to each one of us. As I said to you last week, the visions are strange, but they are just as relevant to us today. We're called in a hard situation, but we are called to have courage. We're called to persevere. We're called to have integrity. I think more than ever before to do this. And we don't do that when we just follow a procession of people in front of us. I'm thinking about that verse about denying ourselves and what that means during the week. Denying that sense of wanting to fit in sometimes or to be accepted. I sometimes think that when we kind of take those words, deny yourself, we think of them in terms of big denials. God is calling me to be a missionary in China, so I will leave everything here, a dramatic decision in life, and I will move. A big denial. But what Jesus says is that he calls us to take up our cross each day. I don't think it's necessarily just talking about big denials. I think it's actually talking about little denials. Because taking up a cross each day is not taking up my cross once every 10 years. It's each day. Not giving in to temptation. Will I stand up for what I believe and risk being isolated in a workplace, a neighbourhood or a sporting club or with friends? Will I choose to deny myself by forgiving this person and then giving away my ability to harbour anger and bitterness against them? Will I deny myself by showing mercy and kindness to someone who doesn't deserve it? See, following Jesus is a hard road. But he calls us to come and follow. I trust that in the life of Ezekiel, that you will see our lives, your life, my life. I trust that in that you will see that Ezekiel is driven by this vision of who God is, and then that changes what he does. And in seeing that vision of God, there's a conviction to come and follow. To be a messenger of good news, even when people are hard and rebellious. Please let me pray for us. God, we thank you that you give us a real vision of who you are, an experience of who you are. A God of love, God of majesty, power, of holiness. And God, I pray that that vision of who you are would so change our lives that we would have courage to follow you into how you call us for life. Father, I pray that we would be inspired by Ezekiel, see what you taught him, and so would own it for ourselves. Give us courage to not fear. Help us to persevere. To be people of integrity. To digest your words and let them change us before we change others. And to live out that calling that you place on our lives.